I see Christopher joining.
Okay. All right, Vicky.
All right.
All right.
I think I see a few people joining. So just want to welcome everybody to the CRMCOE event. We'll be discussing CRM and Salesforce Test Automation. So thank you for joining. Those of you who are just joining, I hear a couple people pinging in. Just a couple housekeeping items. If you could mute yourself, we will have questions at the end of the session. So we'll make sure we address those. You can just type those in the chat and I'll make sure to address that with the panelists. So thank you so much for joining us today. I think we have a few more people that are jumping in. Quick introductions. I'd like to thank our thought leaders for joining us today. So we have Richard Clark, Chief Innovation Officer from Provar. Thank you, Richard, for joining. We have James Kosmides. I think I pronounced that correctly, James.
Kosmides. Yep, Kosmides.
Kosmides. Thank you. And you are the CRM Salesforce Manager there?
Yes, I am.
Rowe Price?
Yes.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us. And then Nicki Bang-Madsen. And you are from, I believe, you are from Denmark. Is that correct?
Yes, so that is correct.
Okay, well, welcome. I know it's late for you, so I appreciate you joining. So we have excellent panelists today. We're really excited to start the conversation. Our moderator will be Velu Palani. Velu, thanks for joining. And I'm your host, Vicky Skuja. I will be taking questions and moderating, keeping us on schedule today. So I'm going to pass it over to Velu to kick us off. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I would like to introduce myself, and I would like, after that, panelists introduce themselves. They have some great credentials. I would like to hear from themselves. So my name is Velu Palani. I'm based in Chicago. I have been in the ecosystem for a while, over about 20 years or so in the Salesforce ecosystem, as well as the CRM ecosystem. So the challenge, I run this COE for a large healthcare provider in Chicago, HCSC Corporation, very large footprint. And testing has been always a challenge for anyone, whether you have one instance or multiple instances. So having said that, this is one of my favorite topics, and I would like to welcome our panelist, Richard Clark, James Kosmides, and Nicki Bang-Madsen. And so, Richard, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Thanks, Velu. Hi, everyone. So Richard Clark, I'm Chief Innovation Officer at Provar, the test automation tool for Salesforce. My history goes back, as I say, a long time for CRM. Before I even knew what CRM was, I was doing CRM without knowing it. We called it prospecting then, and we called it customer database. So I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem not as long as Velu, not many people have. So since 2007, both implementing Salesforce customers, running my own ISV practice as well, publishing apps on the App Exchange. So I've come across testing challenges from all those aspects, whether you're an end user, an ISV, or a system integrator. And I've been at Provar since 2017, helping customers with their DevOps maturity and helping our customers understand how testing can actually speed up your delivery of DevOps. So I'm happy to share my experience with you today.
Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate it. And for everybody's information, Richard is joining us from UK. I know it's a little late in the evening for you. Richard, thank you for joining.
No worries, not as late as Denmark, so.
There you go. Okay, so, Jim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Velu. Jim Kosmides, joining from Baltimore, Maryland area. Very happy to be here. Thank you. I have been working with Salesforce for more than 10 years. I'm also the Salesforce and Cloud Application Manager at Rowe Price. where I manage and work with quite a few cloud-based applications, but primarily around Salesforce. And I've really covered so many roles, from development to testing. I've worked as an analyst, as a manager, as a scrum master. So really, for my entire career, really touched on and been very closely engaged in many different aspects of cloud applications and CRM. So thank you.
You're welcome, Jim. Thank you for joining. And you are in the East Coast time, so we have 4 different time zones. Nicki, thank you for joining. Please tell us about yourself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nicki Bang-Madsen from Denmark. So, as Richard said, it's a little bit later at my time. But I have been in the ecosystem in Salesforce for like 6 years. So in that, I'm maybe the youngster here. But I have a lot of experience regarding test automation, DevOps, all about it when you look into Salesforce. So that's where I really feel I'm the strong one. So I'm really grateful for being a part of this.
Thank you, Nicki. Again, welcome everyone. Let's make this one as a big fun event for us. All right. So today we will have a discussion on why testing, which is a very fundamental question. I always say, why do we do what we do? So we'll talk quickly, and then we will directly get into the Salesforce testing challenges, when to test when it comes to CRM or a Salesforce, what is the test automation, the benefits, and of course, the statistics and trends, and preparing your organization for readiness. And we will also have a Q&A session. So please keep your questions till the end. And if you have questions, as Vicky said, post it on your channel, the chat box, and we will answer your questions at the end. So we will get to the topic, why testing, and especially why Salesforce testing, why CRM testing. So that's the big question. As you all know, Salesforce releases 3 times a year, major releases, and they do have small patches, and they continuously release. It's a big ecosystem, as you all know. As we all know, any bug not detected in the design phase will cost 10 times more time to detect at the coding phase, and an additional 10 times more at the debugging phase. Richard, thank you for giving that tip, which is so important that you find the bugs as early as possible. But now, when on top, in any project that you do in Salesforce, you will fit into one of the cycles. When you are going live, you will actually look for one of those releases while you are developing it, or designing and developing it. So now we are actually spring 21. You see this, the dates are well laid out. Richard, can you help us explain the gap to our audience? What does this mean to us?
Sure. So I think, like any software delivery, your own team, you want to make changes, and Salesforce is a platform where you can build on from day one. And very few people just use Salesforce out the box, but you don't need to test it out the box. As you build each change, as you make each change you want to do, everyone thinks of the things that they've just built, and people rarely think about testing the stuff that they've built before. So across the top there, we've got all the, maybe if you're doing monthly releases yourself, you need to think about when you're timing and doing those releases. And typically many companies do change freezes over a Christmas period. That's at least some breathing time for most people. But for Salesforce teams, you're pretty much under pressure during that month anyway, because there's always a release come January that you need to be ready for. So you need to be ready to hit the ground running when people come back in the new year. And what you need to be able to do is, we have a Salesforce in their 3 releases have a pre-release. That pre-release is ideally aimed at ISVs. So it's the first chance most ISVs get a chance to see what's changed. And even only it's halfway through that almost before we see the release notes on what's actually in that release. And then Sandbox is when, or Sandbox Preview is when most customers and most test teams first are able to run their regression tests. So when we say regression tests, it's checking that you haven't changed anything, but has anything you've already written or implemented, does it no longer work that was working before? And that's why Salesforce do sandbox testing. It gives you a chance before it hits your production org to report any problems or any new features or any features that are auto-activated.
Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate it. It's a very a topic by itself. So yeah, when we look at why testing as a first topic, this is what happens every year, every quarter, every month. Salesforce releases. So you as an org owner or a COE leader or a testing manager, you should be cognizant about this release cycles. And we are not going to go and say why testing as a basic thing. You got to test anything you develop, you need to test. But on top of it, you are looking at the Salesforce release cycles. So Jim, you do manage a large environment. You and I have worked together in the past, a lot of our working relationship there. As you have been managing large applications, how do we make regression testing more streamlined or easier as these releases every quarter hits us?
Yeah, I think one of the clear messages that you see in a slide like this is that Salesforce is a moving environment. There are Salesforce maintenance releases, critical releases, instance refreshes, your team is deploying. And so regression testing becomes very important. To make regression testing easier, it's all about repeatability, maintainability, and even traceability back to the requirements and the functionality that you're expecting. If you think about regression testing, it's something that you're going to run again and again, quickly on short notice, and it's got to be repeatable. You need to develop it in a way that it's maintainable, because as your code changes, as the environment changes, you need to keep up with it. And those are the kinds of things you want to do to keep to make regression testing a little bit easier.
Thank you, Jim. As I said, this is a big topic. So Nicki, you're, especially when you are on the ground doing the actual work with your team as a lead test engineer with your current organization or even your previous organization, what do you see the challenges in this release cycles, especially the testing of all the new features coming out and making sure that you're not missing your existing features?
I think the major focus will be both about actually having the focus on the TTD model, where you actually follow up with the test, so you don't have this huge technical debt all the time about your test automation, that you're doing the test automation in the next sprint so that you can't follow up on it. But it also brings us back to one of the key factors about test automation when you think about reusability. As Jim just said, the maintainability is such a huge factor when you look at all of those releases. So the reusability should be a primary topic for that. So I think that's one of the key factors to actually be able to follow up on it, to keep on finding and get the most value out of the regression test.
Gotcha. All right. I assume, Richard, maybe I have a follow-up question on this. There is a possibility for us to do an automation. So I know we are going to talk later on about the automation, but when I look at the screen, my mind keeps thinking, hey, can we automate some of the things? I assume that it is possible, correct?
100% is possible. Most of the things can be automated. And the thing we need to talk about today is being smart about what you automate, because Salesforce have thoroughly tested their platform before it even gets to pre-release. I know that because I helped them before that with their alpha and beta testing as well. So they've checked what they're releasing is generally correct, and they've eliminated 99% of any bugs that they have. What you need to test and need to cover is make sure you've got automation on what matters to your business.
Right. Thank you. So we will definitely talk about the automation, why automation, and how it's going to help us. No, thank you, Richard. So let's talk about the challenges here. So the biggest challenge for all of us, yeah, is Salesforce is a managed application. So you think you have a control on the application, but you literally not control. You don't have a full control because Salesforce has got something called standard objects and system components. You don't mess with that. It's all fully protected. On top of it, you are customizing really, really hard to make the environment fit your business needs. And when you customize it, we not only write code, we customize a lot of things, roles, profiles. You see the field IDs change every time the new release comes in. The UI framework is changing. And we are forced upgrades. When I say forced upgrades here, I think it's there is no choice for you. You will automatically be upgraded. I wish we have this kind of opportunity when we fly. We will automatically be upgraded from economy to the business, which doesn't happen all the time. So data and metadata deployment is another challenge. So when we look at this, so Richard, how do you explain this challenges to the audience? And it's so overwhelming when we look at this. Oh, man, I got to test all these things every release. For developers, the more people are on the ground, test engineers and the developers, so they always say, okay, is it a bug or is it a problem because of the release? How do you explain this slide to the audience?
Okay, so the key fact is these are all quantifiable things that you can check for. And the complexity of things like roles, profiles, permissions is the sheer combination. And it's too much for anyone to think about all those things, but you need to have some test coverage. And if you're doing test automation, it's not something you do immediately. It's not something on day one you suddenly have 100% coverage. It's something you work at over time. And based on the results you get of the things that are dynamic, the things that are break-in, the things that are not what we call robust, you build up your test pack over time to have that coverage. What's interesting with Salesforce is because, as you say, it's a platform we're building on top of. The rest of the IT industry has moved on way past Salesforce in the last 20 years. We've got scripted ways of doing deployments and building containers, and you can do it repeatedly on the fly. And we're seeing Salesforce are kind of doing that with things like Scratch orgs, but they're not quite there yet. So we need extra tooling on top of Salesforce to help us make sure that when we deploy our changes into an environment, if it works in environment A and we push it to environment B, we just want confidence that it still works and everything is still fine. And I haven't got to go in there and switch on that flow or enable that validation rule that you forgot to do when you deployed it at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Gotcha. So, Nicki, when we look at this, it's easier for leaders to say, you know what, or even for Salesforce, as a matter of fact, we tested. So when we upgrade yourself, we don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about testing everything. You do need to test because it automatically migrates everything, your data and metadata. So as a test engineer, what is the most difficult item to test in this list and why do you think so?
I think I will agree with Richard about the roles, the profiles, the permissions. And if you then combine it together with the data and the metadata deployment, what often happens is that it's around that area we often see that the most fails, of course, because most of the times your test is requiring those the correct profile, the correct access, all of this, and then you want to do it and it just fails. So what we really need to do is we need to be better at the deployment stage when we're actually working with the metadata, because that's where we often see it fails along the way.
Yeah, I hear you. Jim, what's your take on this one when you look at the slide? Okay, are there any other challenges that we missed, especially during deployment or whatever the cycle that we have?
Yeah, Yeah, I think one of the messages that's coming across, in the last two slides here is, again, how Salesforce is a moving environment, and an application that works perfectly today may not work perfectly tomorrow as things change, right? Even if you don't change your application at all. One of the things Nicki's talking about there, and I'll just kind of add to it, is it's really important to test across all of your profiles, probably test the permission sets as well. I've seen testers just log in as admin, sysadmin, or one profile and do a lot of testing. That's not really going to accomplish the job.
Mhm.
The other thing, when you're talking about data, are you testing in a full copy sandbox, or do you have partial data? Do you have representative data? If you're coming up short on the data, you may not really be able to exercise the code very well, and that could cause you to miss other issues or defects within your code. So all of that really just comes together to create a very challenging test environment.
Thank you, Richard. This is a question for anyone. Just curiosity, I was talking to one of my development delivery leaders. Hey, this quarter, I don't have a lot of code going in. I don't need to do a lot of testing. I didn't make any changes. It's all there, and it's only one release, one sprint. I made some changes. I don't expect anything to be changing. So as far as Salesforce goes, they promise everything should work. So is that really true statement? I have not validated, and I didn't want to argue with them because I did not know this answer to the question. If I don't make any changes to my environment, from quarter spring to, let's say, winter to spring, do I have to still test? If so, which one should be the most important I should be paying attention to?
So firstly, before Nicki jumps in there, I just want to say Salesforce do not guarantee they don't break anything. They do not promise you they will fix your application, which is why they give you the sandboxes and give you the windows to test. Nicki, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I want to add. I think that brings back one of the major key factors below test automation, in my opinion. That is exploratory testing. You don't test what the developer is building. You don't test what we know would work, but you also look behind the scene, think about what did he miss along the way. And I think that brings us back to the evolving framework that with the regression test, that even though we didn't change anything in one of the subjects, we still test it because there's always something you miss along the way of the impacts from one of the other changes in the subjects.
Yeah, well said.
And if you think as well, Salesforce is not an island, okay? There are other applications. So yes, you might not change your application, but if there's ever a Salesforce release, summer 21, I think order save behavior changes now, or did it happen in spring? So if you've got any automation, any processes or flows or Apex triggers on the order item, if you do not test that, you're either going to fire something twice, which means 2 orders could go through into your SAP system or your order management system, or nothing will go through, or it rejects it as a duplicate. So there's always reasons to have that regression pack, but that could be because Salesforce is making changes, or other elements in your organization are making changes, and they need your regression pack to understand that they haven't broken the integration that you rely on already.
I agree with you. That's a scary part. If you don't test it, what could go wrong, and it will go wrong. So it's that's the lesson. Now I also have I found an answer how to respond back when leaders ask me, okay, hey, what happens if I don't make any changes? Why should I be wasting a lot of time and energy to do all these things? I know this is a great. I'm sure there are a lot more challenges, and so now let's, we've seen the challenges. Now, next topic, we will see what to test so that the challenges can be addressed. So now, when we look at this pyramid here, unit test, we all know there are different phases of testing in whether it's a Salesforce or a Java application. There was I was in a meeting and somebody said, should we know Salesforce to do development work? Can I bring some Java developers to learn Salesforce and then start working on building application? And somebody said, no, then you will be building Java application on Salesforce. So it's not going to be a Salesforce application, it'll be a Java on Salesforce. So I assume that it happens in the Salesforce testing as well. So when we look at this diagram or a triangle, unit test, API testing, integration testing, and UI testing, and I'm going to make the statement UI testing would be much easier, but it's much more trickier. Whereas integration testing would be probably complex. So I am not an expert in testing. I'm going to reach out to you guys and say, what is the most difficult one to do testing and why? I will probably start with Nicki.
I think the most difficult will always be the UI because of the complexity to actually keep down the maintainability of the test case itself. What I really like about the test and triangle is that when specifically you talk about Salesforce, they was actually inventing what I really enjoyed about it. When you say unit test in Salesforce, it's not really unit test. It's more like a semi-integration API test because you're communicating with data. So if you look at the modern test and triangle, what I really think people should paying attention to is this about the mix of the art. That if we can increase the usage of API statements inside of our UI test, we can keep down the maintainability, increase the executable, and also make it more resilient to changes, because most likely the API won't change, even though Salesforce is changing the UI. So I really think that you can make UI tests a lot easier to handle along the way. And it's the same fact about integration test. You can combine it with API, so you do the verification there. So it's all about how you actually are able to look into a single test case and do the combination of those levels.
I appreciate sharing that, Nicki. Jim, when you, I know we worked together in the past, I always was impressed with your very detailed, systematic approach in terms of producing reports and, okay, hey, this is what's happening each level of testing components, or if you call it categories. As we, fast forward, after so many years, you've gone into the live of all your applications. What seems to be the surprising element of the testing between API integration? What surprises you, or what should you be ready every time when Salesforce releases, or every time you release something new?
Yeah, I think it's important to look across this triangle or pyramid here and really think about each layer of your testing and break it down. For me, in my experience, the integration and API testing can really have the most surprises. I mean, it's certainly going to be very challenging because it's out of your control. So while the UI testing may be difficult, it's at least within your control. You're managing that part of Salesforce. But as soon as your application is talking to other applications, whether it's through a file integration or through APIs, now that's a whole wild card, and you don't know what they're doing. The documentation for how that handshake works may not be accurate. And if I kind of go back for a second to what you were saying earlier, or asking earlier, Velu, hey, even if we didn't change our application, do we need to test, right? We didn't change anything. Well, we may not have changed anything, but all of your integrations may have changed, and the other systems that you work with may have changed. And so it's really, you have to just make sure that you're testing on every level. And in my experience, integrations and APIs will tend to be the trickiest piece.
Gotcha. Richard, now this actually triggered me another question completely. I'm a little bit more worried. That's what happens when you are deep breathing every day Salesforce. maybe you don't have any other life, or I don't have any other life. So when we, it's a very interesting point. Jim brought it up. It's not that you are changing. What if the other application changing? They are sending, they change the data model. Especially Salesforce is becoming, when 15, 20 years ago, when I started versus today, I don't even recognize it. I feel like I'm a newborn in front of Salesforce. That's how it looks different. So how, I think that's a big challenge, right? So when external system, they change their model, it shows that how collaboratively the team should be working. The question is, you are leading one of the industry pioneer in terms of Salesforce testing, Provar testing, the tool that helps us to automate. Can the tools like yours help us to, not take too much of Tylenol, which is a medicine that we take whenever our head is exploding, whether it's really exploding or not, we feel like it, we pop 2 pills. Okay, yeah, that hopefully that will subsidize the headache. Do you think the tools like yours can help us to solve these challenges?
Absolutely. But obviously, like any tool, you have to use it correctly. And I think when we look at this, I call it a mountain, because actually you need coverage across all these levels. And the lower levels, most people have unit tests if they've got any Apex code in their org, but they're probably doing, even if you're an admin, you probably do unit testing. Most of us wouldn't add a rule or add a flow or a process without actually testing it before deploying it. Same with APIs. Most people that start using APIs, if they're doing any integration, they're testing the APIs that they've customized. And if you're doing integration testing, you're testing the integration in a suite of environments. So you have to put those building blocks in place first. And as you move up that mountain, UI testing is really that pinnacle, that visual part where you do more than just check that the application works. You want to check that the application makes sense, that you've got fields located near each other, that you're not scrolling through the screen. And all these things we'd call asserts within a tool like Provar, because they're all things you want to check and you want coverage across them all. And we'll probably talk later, I imagine, about this sort of thing around test plans and structures. And I know Nick has got some great input on this as well, but you want to have coverage across all these levels and a tool that can cover every aspect, not just UI testing.
Very good. So we have seen why we need to do the testing and the challenges. This is a big ocean, and we are trying to cover this all in 1 hour with panelists like yours with a lot of expertise. I'm sure you can bring a lot of ideas and the real life experience. So we will talk about what is a test automation. So we've seen why we need to do testing, and we also saw the challenges. The next topic, I would like to go directly into the test automation, especially today we are talking about Salesforce, and we will talk about test automation in the world of Salesforce. And I think I would like to bring Richard into this mix as a first panelist to help us understanding the test automation. Whenever I think about test automation, I've worked with many clients, and currently I work for a large company. Everything seems to be, we are automating it. What is the test automation, and how do you explain in a way people think that, hey, you know what, if you don't do a test automation, you are really missing it, and you're missing competitive advantage, whatever that we are missing. If you can help us explain, that would be great.
Sure. I mean, Jim mentioned this earlier, and it's that bit in the middle, the practice of running repeatable tests automatically. So what we're trying to do is take away the aspects of testing that, to be honest, boring, mundane, and prone to error if humans do it. And that's what test automation is really bringing in. All the stuff that doesn't have a lot of value in terms of the effort put in and the hours consumed, we can automate all that stuff. So all our checks and balances can be in there, because people are either using human testers to manually test things repetitively, which is really unrewarding for the same person. And you end up with conflict in teams where a developer changes something, the tester tests it. I liken this to doing the dishes before we had dishwashers, that one of you was washing, one of you was drying. The developer's washing, washes it, hands it to the tester to dry the plate, starts drying it, then spots there's a problem, there's a mark on the plate, hands it back to the developer, dips it in, cleans that bit. The tester has to test that and dry the whole plate again. That's the problem with manual testing, is the effort is huge. Also, we have this problem where everything's left to the end. So what test automation can do is it can actually deliver in sprint testing for agile projects. It can help you get results before you move on in the mindset to the next phase of the project, and speed up the whole delivery cycle by not having this huge chunk at the end where you suddenly go, as we said earlier, oh, sorry, that didn't work, go back, it's a design error. So the earlier you test, the more frequent you test, the more you can realize those benefits.
You brought up an excellent point, a good analogy, but while I was growing up, there was no dishwasher, so I had to help my mom literally, and she would actually go and clean. Because she would come and inspect whether I'm doing it right, and she's so perfectionist, I had to do it again. So that's a different topic that we should probably talk offline. So when we look at the repeatable, Jim, I do know that you have some kind of an automation with respect to Salesforce testing. What do you see the real benefits from your people? I'm sure there is a satisfaction level, but what else do you see as a benefit?
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to automating the monotonous, repeatable testing so that humans and the human intelligence can focus on those trickier scenarios that you really need somebody to get in there and do manual testing for. So if we can use automation to basically take that off the table and just handle that in a nice automated, repeated way, then all the smart people that we have working at the company and working with us, great testers, right? They can actually be creative and sort of test outside of the box, tear up the script, and sort of look for those more difficult to find issues that may not be built into repeatable tests. So the bottom line there is that automation helps free up testers to be more creative and find those more difficult to find defects.
Great. I agree with you on that. And I've seen real benefits as well. As I said, I'm not an expert in this space, but I work with quite a bit of testing teams, and I do see the importance of the testing teams knowing the platform. So Nicki, how realistic is to do an automation? Automation is like, we have Salesforce, we have APIs, and we have integration, all kinds of things happen. And on top of it, another automation is another technology, another tool. Is it really so difficult to do automation?
I would say no. It's more like it's quite easy if the entire team and the company stands behind it and actually respect it as a project behind. Because I really think that with the correct mindset, and if you have the correct focus on the maintainability, but also you respect the fact about the exploratory testing, manuality testing, that you need something to deliver the knowledge to actually do the correct test automation. In that sense, you can also find out, does it make a value to automate the test? Because I don't think you will ever get rid of manually test completely in the regression part, because it's not everything that makes sense to automate, to say it straight.
Thank you. So that's you brought a very good point. I think so. Testing is not influenced from testing team. What I'm hearing from you, Nicki, is it's across the enterprise. Specifically, if you have a large footprint, Salesforce footprint, it's coming from the leadership, right? And is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
No, that's a good lesson, and we will continue to the people who are listening in. So I have seen that as well. Yeah, test automation is not going to be a small team trying to do a POC and say, okay, let's go do the test automation. I think it should be a top-down approach where the leadership needs to realize that it is indeed a need, and a need is now rather than future. So this is going to save a lot of time. So Richard, as a chief innovation officer running a large footprint across the world with respect to Salesforce ecosystem test automation, I'm hearing from many places that I worked with, even when I was doing research, Selenium is a very popular test automation. So what is the difference between Selenium and a tool like yours, Provar?
Great question. So Selenium is what we typically call a coded framework. So people will build have a bunch of developers writing tests in order to undertake that regression testing, which is great. And it can work extremely well where you're writing an application from scratch and you're owning all the source code for that, and you're controlling how the application looks. And it's very effective. But what you're doing there is you're using a highly paid resource, a developer, a valuable resource, which is quite scarce for most of us, to test something another developer has written. So tools like Provar will use the same web drivers that Selenium provides to interact with something like the user interface, but we'll do it in a way that is not writing code, that is executing a script, let's call it that. So it's a set of instructions of what the things are you actually want to test. And therefore those vendors like Provar, we're able to adapt that engine according to things like different Salesforce releases, or we can recognize how components implemented on the page, or we can see if something's rendered in Classic or Lightning and decide to execute differently and understand that buttons are located in different components and that some buttons are dynamic and some buttons are visible by profile. So because we have that intelligence built in and the ability to bind to things like metadata, we're far more robust to test applications than something that's written in code. But yeah, a coded framework, Selenium does work very well for a lot of applications and is still very viable for many teams and is a valuable skill.
But go ahead then, Nicki. I want to hear.
I wanted to add to that. I think that now I have been trying it. I tried the Selenium on Salesforce, just plain Selenium. The experience, and then we come back to all the difficulties about testing on Salesforce. How quickly you actually getting burned on the maintainability, because I think if you compare most tools to tools actually specific for Salesforce, is that you need to respect Salesforce as a CM system and not just a normal website. For normal websites, you got Selenium. It's a strong tool. It can work perfectly. But when you look at the metadata structure inside Salesforce, it's just not working if you don't really do something to make it work specifically for Salesforce.
I agree with you on that. I think so. It's a simple technical question. It may be a dumb question, so please bear with me. Do we need to have Selenium if I have to go with Provar, or I can directly go to Provar without Selenium?
You can use Provar without Selenium, but if you've got existing people with Selenium skills, some of that can translate to using Provar if you want to use the advanced topics, because you can actually extend and build out and write your own components. So if you implemented your own UI framework using Angular or React or something like that, those skills would still be valuable with using tools like Provar if you want to extend it for those other applications. Or as I say, because we don't just test Salesforce, that's what we're designed for. When you want to test those applications, you still want people with an understanding of what's a good locator, what that looks like. And Selenium will teach people what locators are, XPath, CSS, name locators, IDs, etc. So they'll understand the structure.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I just want to make sure that people who are hearing into this session and say, how complicated is it, easy, or should I be moving away from Selenium? I'm sure if anyone has questions, please reach out to Richard directly or Nicki. Jim, if you want to volunteer, you are welcome. And I am certainly not an expert in that space, so please directly reach out to them. So now let's talk about the maturity here, right? So when I look at the slide here, first of all, testing automation works, and I've seen it. I'm sure everybody agrees here. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about this topic. And there is a steps, like anything else in life, there is an evolving maturity cycle. So Richard, would you like to help us understand the testing maturity? I did not know there is a testing maturity. We all know the software lifecycle maturity, the CMM model. So how does this work? And is there a relationship between the CMM and the testing maturity, that slide that you have?
Absolutely. So when we take CMMI, it defines those things on the left about things being an initial, defined, integrated, managed optimization. And all we've done here is take that down and apply it to a testing faction. And I don't think I'm alone in admitting, confessions time, that my first few Salesforce projects, we didn't do any testing. Okay, what we did was we configured something in production because we didn't have Sandbox, and we asked our CRO or VP of sales and our service managers to tell us if that was what they wanted or not. In fact, sometimes we even built it in front of them. They started using it. So we weren't doing any testing, and that was great at first until we wanted to start doing changes. So the level of maturity any company needs to find is down to them. And I've defined these levels, but other people may have different goals or different levels which they consider a high level of maturity. So yes, the first level is making sure it works. And that could be manual testing. It could be using things like Selenium. It could be using a tool like Provar. But ultimately, if you're really going to repeat that, you have to know what it is you were testing so you can check if there's any gaps in what you were doing, and that someone can review that and say, do you know what? We don't need to run those 100 tests anymore. The point is no one uses that application anymore. So you need to have records of what's been tested, and you need to have scripts of why you're testing things and what the value is those. And as you move up the maturity, you start then integrating that testing into your continuous integration lifecycle, which is very, very hard. That's a talk for another day, and into your continuous delivery pipeline as well. So once you're starting to get integration, once you're starting to use those test scripts with automation, you're starting to see some value in immediate results. And as you move up the next level, you start thinking about that there's different test plans you want to execute based on where you are in the life cycle. So if I'm very early in the life cycle, I probably don't want to do a full regression test. I probably just want to be selected, like your example earlier, of the things that I'm changing. I want to be intelligent about what I'm testing. And if I'm creating tests, why should I then ask someone to go onto Jira and raise a defect? I should be automating that creation of defects. And the final level is that if I'm doing all these things, I actually want to look at how I'm doing my testing and my test strategy and the gaps. And I want to continuously improve that and optimize that on an ongoing basis. And that's a very hard level to reach. And not every business will find they can justify the cost of that. But that's the thing, you set the goals for where you want to get to, and you can measure incremental improvements in how you go about your testing maturity.
I like it, but my mind is spinning right now. Is it like going to Mars with rover landing, or is it?
If you're Elon Musk and SpaceX, yes.
That's what I'm like. Okay, so if it's a small environment, Jim, right? If it's maybe 100 users with standard sales team working to sell standard products and price books, whatever you call it, versus you have thousands and thousands of users. You are running a mission critical application in Salesforce, and they have a standard operating development lifecycle. Now you're saying you got to go and automate. You will see a value. Now you're telling them, you know what? Let's all go to Mars and let's have fun with it. When they see it, I have millions of lines of codes, thousands of users, be a big testing thing going on. How do I make the change? I mean, this is a real, because it's Salesforce has been there for 20 years. or 21 years or 22 years. They started in 1999.
Yeah.
So, Jim, I mean, help me to help all of us understand, is it realistic, the maturity, and how realistic to make the change in terms of starting from, we all know it works, but how do we make this work?
I think, you know, if you take that analogy of going to Mars, right, the challenge is convincing management that this is a trip to Mars, and it's complicated. And, you know, sadly, developers usually get a lot of the glory, and they deserve it, right? I mean, it's absolutely a difficult job to build these applications. A lot of times testers are almost looked at as an impediment to releasing the product. And I like to tell the story of how I've managed large testing teams, and I've been brought into a room with a bunch of managers and leaders, and they're looking at me and saying, "Hey, when will you be done testing?" And the answer is, I'll be done testing when there are no more defects, you know, and I'll say, I didn't put the defects there. I'm just finding them. And, you know, it's not my fault, right? I'm hired. My team is hired and put in place to find these defects. So when there's no more defects, we'll be done testing. So I think convincing management that you really do need to apply resources, which means budget, to testing, that automation will have benefits, that the testing team is your friend. They're not the blockers that are keeping you from going to production. They're there to help you and help the organization to not put an application out there that might actually create a financial risk or a reputational risk, right? There's a lot of good reasons why we do testing. And I think just kind of making that sell and explaining to others why this is an important part of development. It's not just all about coding. That really becomes sort of the challenge as you're trying to move up this maturity model.
Thank you. Nicki, this is going to be the toughest question for you. Have you seen L1, L2, L3 levels? What is the highest level you're seeing in terms of maturity in company?
I think the highest level have actually been, if I should be a bit flexible, I will say it was between the top and the test plans and results. I think, and the reason we got there was both. One of the things, of course, is about the investment the leaders made into test automation, because one of the biggest questions is about when leaders are talking about test automation, they should think about it. It's an investment, just like Salesforce. You invest into Salesforce, you get this platform, but you don't get all of it served. You need to build it up from the ground. So slowly but steady, you will get the value back piece by piece. It's the same about test automation. If you then show the boldness and doing the investment, the testers need to have the curiosity to keep on challenging. How can we get further ahead? And I think that's how we got so far, was by curiosity. And that about we never got, what can you say, happy with what we had. We always wanted to get more out of it. So it was like we kept on challenging the test automation tool. We kept on challenging the leaders, the developers. So in the end, we actually did end up with a really, really, really good solution where we had the least possible maintainability for it.
Thank you, Nicki. Go ahead.
Just like to add to that, I think if going back to your Mars analogy, just make it clear, you don't aim for Mars when you're on the ground. You aim for the Wright brothers, you aim to fly, controlled flight's the first thing.
Exactly.
Then you try and get higher, and then you try and get in space, then maybe around the moon, on the moon, around Mars before you land on it. You have to do those other steps. You can't jump straight to level 5. You have to aim at the next level of maturity before, and that proves the benefits. And the cost goes up as you go up maturity. Of course it does.
I thank you. I think it's a good analogy. It just came to my mind. Okay, when I saw the slide, am I going to Mars, right? All right. Vicky, how are we doing the time? Okay.
It's about 7 minutes.
Oh,
So
boy,
4.
okay. All right. Okay. So okay. Everybody got 30 seconds on here about that. All right. So what's going on in the current state and trends? Jim, would you like to take this one? You got 30 seconds, Jim.
Yeah, sure. Well, clearly we're using trying to use the right tools to help us speed up and automate our CI/CD process. So we're using tools like AutoRabbit and Selenium and check marks for code scanning. And we're trying to just tie it all together so that, in the perfect world, we hit the button, the code is built, it's scanned, it's deployed, and, we try to just automate that entire process as much as possible.
Thank you. Nicki, what do you see on the ground?
I think on the ground, I see that we are right now working on an entire solution. So I think that with the test automation tools, right now we are working with tools like Provar and also with the Azure DevOps for the CI/CD. So I think right now we actually really good going, and I think it's just a matter of time before DevOps Center will arrive, and then it's going to be fun to see how that can challenge this market about CI/CD.
Thank you, Richard. Is the AI the next big thing, or is it going to be the magic wand which will solve a lot of unknown or problems that humans cannot identify?
Well, I wish it was the latter. At the moment, what we're seeing is lots of tools are jumping on their AI bandwagon. It's being hyped out of all belief. And what they're doing is they're having features that are sort of self-healing locators, i.e. we didn't get it right, it's brittle, and we'll keep trying until we get it right. That's not AI. Or they're using a way of explaining a test in English, like an Alexa assistant. Anyone in AI will tell you an Alexa, an Echo is not AI. Okay, some very smart language recognition that is AI, but that's the only bit that is. So what we're looking for is the next wave of AI. The real AI will about tools that recognize what you're testing. They recognize the variants that they can explore and the value of those variants. And to do that, you need machine learning from hundreds of thousands of tests from hundreds of thousands of customers in one place in order to do that. One thing that is a very interesting subject I think people should go and Google is mutation testing, where the testing changes the code and tests again automatically. For me, that's the missing piece of AI in testing. It's actually development and test is one thing. They're not separate disciplines. And that's, I think, what's going to bring the most benefit.
Thank you. I think this is a topic by itself, the trends and the future of testing. So I know we are running out of time. Vicky may not be very happy here. So organization preparedness. So everybody has, I'm just going to wrap up the slide, then we'll take the questions. Org readiness, people readiness, and process readiness. This is for anything, whether it is a testing or CI/CD or data or life cycle development. So when the question I have, yes or no question, do we need to, are you, let me make it simple. Do we need to know Salesforce to be a Salesforce tester? Richard?
Ideally, yes. In order to make the most of that testing, you do need to have some knowledge of Salesforce, but that can be gained easily with tools like Trailhead. You can find out quite a lot in a short amount of time. We've seen people from all disciplines, all backgrounds learn Salesforce. I'm sure someone who's generally got a computer science degree and understands IT and is a tester can also learn from those modules as well. So that's my short answer.
Thank you. Yes or no, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So that you're not wasting time testing native functionality that you really shouldn't be testing, and you can focus on the customizations. So knowing Salesforce definitely helps to be a better Salesforce tester.
Thank you. Nicki, what's your answer? We lost connection to Mars.
Okay. You're on mute, Nicki.
My question yes, that would be a huge yes from our part, because the more you know about Salesforce, the easier it is to find out where the critical pieces is when you need to do your testing. So, yes.
All right.
That,
Thank you, Nicki. I thank you everyone for joining. Vicky, I'm giving back 2 minutes.
We have 2 minutes. I don't see any questions in the chat, but there was one that came in earlier. A question on what is the best approach to start test automation? Who wants to take that?
I think it's important to begin, right? Taking the first step is always the hardest. There's probably no wrong way, but do a market analysis, assess the tools, pick one and start. And it may seem a little daunting at first, but as long as you begin, you'll make progress and you'll advance.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I think it's really important that you accept that you will fail along the way. You will invest time because you want to learn about what is the best possible architecture about it, and also how to get the furthest with least mincing abilities. So it's more about accept that the faster you fail, the faster you learn.
Good point. Great point.
Just to add a vendor's answer to that is most tools will let you have some sort of proof of concept or trial where they'll either you give them access to one of your sandboxes with no customer data in, and they'll build you some tests and then give you hands-on where you can try it yourself. And I think that's essential for anyone. Just try it out. And it's like trying a suit. Not everyone likes the same suit and the same cloth and everything else. So try things out, see what works for you and works for your skill level.
Thank you, Richard. All right, I think that we are at 4 o'clock now. We will be sending out the recording. So if you have some individuals that weren't able to attend today, we can definitely forward that to them. And any other last words of wisdom from the panelists?
I'll just say, don't be afraid. It sounds like a daunting subject, this trip to Mars. But yeah, just try and learn to have controlled flight first is my advice.
Yeah.
All right.
And I like the comment, the faster you make mistakes, the faster you learn. So just start.
Terrific. Well, thank you, panelists, for joining today. Thank you, Velu, for moderating and putting this together. And we will be sending out the recording. Thank you for joining. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.